A warning before we start. This episode contains mention of torture, physical violence, and sexual exploitation. Not too long ago, the marriage of a South Australian public servant we're calling John hit a rough patch. It was during that time that he received a Facebook friend request from an attractive Ukrainian woman named Vera. She told him she was recently single and living on the Sunshine Coast, where she ran a business importing kids' clothing. After a couple of days, the conversation moved to WhatsApp. It's an encrypted messaging platform, meaning sensitive information can be exchanged more freely. Vera asked John if he had any interest in cryptocurrency. As it happened, he did. He'd recently invested a bit of money on a legitimate crypto trading site called CoinSpot. With Vera's encouragement, John opened a new crypto trading account on a different website, and this time he went big. Within 20 days, he'd poured more than $200,000 into the scheme. All of the cash he and his wife had saved up over several years to buy a house. It was only when he tried to withdraw his money that John realised he'd been duped. We've all heard enough scam horror stories to know where this story ends. There was no Vera. She was concocted by a team of scammers running countless similar scams somewhere in Asia.
That is still an active profile. And I can see from that profile, it is still drawing new people in.
Amanda Hodge is the Australian's Southeast Asia correspondent.
So anyone out there, if you're in contact with Vera Putskaya, I suggest you block her now because it's a real worry.
It's called pig butchering by those in the business. Just like pigs being fattened for slaughter, victims are slowly, expertly lured into a false sense of confidence by their new online love interest. Then they go in for the kill. Southeast Asia is quickly becoming the pig butchering capital of the world, with countless scam factories targeting thousands of people online every year. To say it's a big problem would be an understatement. Experts estimate scamming is now the third biggest economy in the world, behind the United States and China, bringing in trillions of dollars every year. And Australians like John are increasingly being targeted because our banking and government regulations are easier to get around than those in place in the US or Europe. One former scammer Amanda spoke to on a recent trip to King's Romans in northern Laos made it crystal clear. This is by design.
Because the bank system and the government, they make us to easier than Europe. At the office, they said like, American is dumb and more change, more expert to scam Australian. Because they are more smarter than American.
If Australian authorities are aware of the extent of the problem, it's not clear what they're doing about it.
My understanding is they haven't quite pivoted towards scamming yet. They're so heavily focused on transnational drug syndicates, which is fair enough and has been the biggest issue in this region for a long time. But this is now the priority, and I don't think they've been fast enough to pivot. That's my understanding. I wanted to check with them. Unfortunately, the interview with the Australian Federal Police was cancelled, and they had a series of written questions they undertook to provide answers before publication, and they didn't. I was, to be honest, quite surprised and disappointed.
The Australian's national crime correspondent David Murray is reporting today the Australian Securities and Investments Commission has been accused of dropping the ball on an international scam syndicate that cost Aussies more than $200 million. A German police representative told Dave they alerted the corporate regulator to the scam in June of last year, and they provided the name, contact details and financial losses of 34,000 Australians who fell victim to it. But ASIC has yet to make contact with any of them. It all begins with the handing back of Hong Kong and the famed gambling enclave of Macau to China.
So it cracked down very hard on money laundering around 2019. And it also made an example of a couple of very big Chinese casino kingpins who are now in jail. So those anti-money laundering measures caused a flight of casinos and casino kingpins and crime syndicates out of Macau. And they were looking for more permissive environments. And they found more than they needed in Southeast Asia, exactly because of these underregulated special economic zones like the Golden Triangle. These are all notorious enclaves that have attracted huge amounts of Chinese money, a lot of it illicit. And of course, the criminal syndicates behind those money flows are also now deeply embedded into those economies, into the politics of those areas as well.
And then the pandemic.
So the pandemic forced these casinos online, and they had this fantastic new market because so did everyone else. When the pandemic closed borders, forced people to stay at home, what else was there to do? We all did the same thing, right? We had our work meetings, our social gatherings on Zoom. These criminal syndicates found that they could reach so many other people as well. I think people were vulnerable because they felt lonely and maybe more amenable to those kind of strange, spontaneous approaches that most of us would normally be suspicious about. And so, here was this amazing new market, and they already had the tools to reach them through the online gambling networks. They had the money laundering networks. They suddenly had the cryptocurrency platforms, and tens of millions of fake cryptocurrency platforms have since been created just for this purpose, to funnel money, not only as a sort of draw card for people who are interested in making quick money out of cryptocurrency, but as a way of laundering that money, through the system, because once it's in a cryptocurrency account, it's gone.
Many experts believe China is the only country with the resources and regional influence to really tackle the so-called scamdemic. And that puts Australian authorities in a tough spot. See, the unique geopolitics of our region makes clamping down on cyber scams just that bit harder. Our relationship with China is out of the freezer, but it's not yet fully thawed. And tensions over China's rising influence in the Pacific means progress is slow. So what do we do?
It's a really tricky question, because the things I'm hearing from regional experts point to the fact that the geopolitics is really getting in the way of what needs to be an international cooperative effort. There's no other way to get around this, right? Cooperation between China, the US and Australia has in the past busted some of the biggest drug syndicates operating in Southeast Asia. But those days of cooperation are gone for the moment. And the other complication is that for China, this is a tricky one, because it's embarrassing for China as well, right? China is doing quite a bit to protect its own citizens. It's deporting Chinese workers, whether they have been compelled or not, because it is putting pressure on countries like Myanmar in particular. But it is not really doing anything about scam compounds once they stop targeting Chinese citizens and once they stop trafficking Chinese scam workers. China is the economic giant in the region. If it wanted to clamp down on this, it really could. But it's really only interested in making sure it doesn't hurt its own citizens right now. From China's perspective, from Beijing's perspective, it probably doesn't see a lot of upside in troubling itself with trying to clamp down for the benefit of Western powers that aren't playing ball.
Coming up, why the people on the other side of the scam can be victims too. Our foreign correspondents do this kind of in-depth reporting and analysis every day, and subscribers to The Australian get unlimited access to their insights and expertise. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after this break. Policing international scams is a double-edged sword because some of the people running the cons aren't there of their own free will. Many are trafficked into the so-called scam factories by recruiters they know. They're sold dreams of well-paid jobs at reputable companies, but the reality is more like a nightmare. New recruits to the compounds operating inside special economic zones dotted around Southeast Asia are indoctrinated through so-called scam universities. It's a training program in which they're taught the ins and outs of the Australian banking system and culture. Things go downhill from there. What you're hearing is a scammer being viciously attacked for their on-the-job performance. Many scammers, just like them, are physically and financially trapped by their employers, who force them to work 7 days a week and demand they pay debts in the thousands of dollars if they want to leave. Those who refuse to work are beaten, tortured, and raped. Some are electrocuted and others are sexually exploited. They're routinely deprived of food and sleep, sometimes both. And they're increasingly lured to the scam factories from as far away as South America, East Africa, and even Western Europe. More often than not, their passports are confiscated, making leaving virtually impossible.
It's completely altered their lives. In many cases, it's ruined their lives. Young people in particular who have finished their education, often university educations, quite fluent in English, computer literate, very smart young people, but facing unemployment rates within their age groups of 20, 25%, no chance of getting a job, looking for a way out of what looks very much like a dead end. And so they too were incredibly vulnerable, particularly because these jobs sounded so great. They were paying so much more. And sadly, actually, so many cases, the job prospects were being reinforced by people they knew who were recruiting them because they were getting a bonus. And maybe that was their ticket out too. So it's just this terrible, vicious cycle.
Amanda Hodge is the Australian's Southeast Asia correspondent. You can read her full investigation into the region's scam factories, as well as additional reporting by national crime correspondent David Murray right now at theaustralian.com.au.